In this episode, you'll learn the one crucial thing you need to know about the legal risks of tracking your spouse and how infidelity impacts the divorce process.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
This week, we had Tanya Helfand on the show, and we had a great conversation about infidelity, divorce, and the legal risks of digital snooping. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Tanya Helfand is joining us. Tanya is a certified matrimonial attorney, mediator, and author of 20 great tips for a successful divorce. Tanya brings 20 years of experience handling complex family law matters. Today, Tanya and I will be discussing when is cheating a reason to divorce and how it impacts the legal process, the legal risks of tracking, wiretapping, and gathering digital evidence on a spouse, and then post-nuptial agreements and key insights from 20 great tips for a successful divorce. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am really excited. Anybody who listens to the podcast knows I always tell lawyers I love having lawyers because I love talking about the law, particularly in different areas, and just the different experiences with family law. I think it's just hopefully very informative for our listeners. So, Tanya, would you just share a little bit about yourself and really kind of how you got into family law and why you stay?
So I've been practicing now. My bio says 28, about 30 years because it was a couple of years off. I started with a general practice, really doing a lot of stuff. And it's the business that actually came back to me. So kind of found me versus the other way. I grew up in a household with a single mom, divorced mom. And what she always taught me that was very helpful was the importance of making a living and being independent. And because even when you have the nicest spouse in the world, stuff happens. So it's important to be able to, deal with life situations. So that was sort of the message. And then in my practice, I think I bring that to the practice of helping people, both moms and dads, sort of with tips and tools and practical advice to get them either more financially knowledgeable if they're not so financially knowledgeable so that they can stand on their own 2 feet and empowering them. A lot of dads that I represent don't know anything about childcare. The rules were separated. So I really do love to help dads also, that the babysitter, figuring out how to do that stuff. They really do love their children. So I think I enjoy many of my clients. They're wonderful and just helping to empower people to get through this difficult process. So it's somewhat fulfilling. So it's good. That's it.
Awesome. Well, and really all the great family law attorneys say things similar to that because it's really helping people and you're making such a difference for that one person by guiding them through the process, preparing them, for what's to come and like during the divorce, but after, right? That's the most important part because they got to live with it. So what's that going to look like for them?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So when you wrote this book, great book, because everybody wants a successful divorce, whatever that means to them, but they want it to be a success, right? And that's part of it, probably defining what will be a successful divorce for you. But, chapter 1 of your book is all about good reasons for divorce. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that. Like, I think people ask that all the time of us. I know I've been, you think I should do this? And that's like a very personal decision, right, for somebody. So let's talk about a little, some good reasons for divorce.
Sure. So exactly as you say, it's personal to the individual. If people are not ready to get a divorce, I never push them to divorce. As a matter of fact, yesterday I had an hour-long meeting with a guy who absolutely didn't want to get divorced. And I spent my hour coaching him on how to, stay with his wife, go to the marriage counselor and stuff like that. So, it's never about pushing a person to a divorce, but there are consistent reasons why people break up. And that's the reality. And I sort of look at it as a math problem. If 70% of your time is spent unhappy with the person, whether it's because you don't trust them, because you're constantly fighting, whether, or alcohol and substance abuse, all these different issues, if really the majority of your time with the person is spent negatively, I consider that the time to consider getting a divorce. No marriage is perfect. If 30% of the time is the rotten time, or 20% of the time, or not rotten, but challenging time, and most of the time is good, I say, try and work on it.
No, but I think that's great advice. I've never heard anybody break it down on percentage, but you're absolutely correct.
And nothing's 100%. And listen, again, it's very personal, and people, I think, feel certainly bad. I don't really know anybody who's like, yay, I'm getting divorced. And everybody feels, no matter where they come from, sort of insecure about getting the divorce and breaking up a family or breaking up. So I'm just trying to put out there, like, you're normal. These are the things that we see all day in, all day out, and it's perfectly okay to move forward with these reasons. So I think that's what I'm trying to convey.
Well, and I also love, like, in your book, you do talk about the goal is to have the best relationship possible with the other person, even if that means ending the marriage, particularly when you have children. I think we've probably both heard from many individuals, like, hey, we were better parents and we got along better after we divorced than during the marriage.
Absolutely. And that benefits the children, because I know a lot of people certainly stay together for the children. That's a concept in our society. But there's a lot of data out there that also says that children that grow up in a hostile environment, or where there's fighting all the time, or people who are not happy, that's not really in their best interest. But if people can be kinder to one another and work together, I think that's a better example for the kids as well. And if everybody's happier, how is that a down thing?
Exactly. Now, all right, let's talk about cheating, because, we both hear that a lot, right? And, either maybe you're cheating, you're being cheated on. Do you think that's always a reason for divorce?
No. I personally have a dear friend whose spouse cheated on her, and I felt just terrible. Right. And she really, the two of them put an enormous amount of effort and work into their relationship. And it took a very long time. She really didn't want to get divorced. They really didn't want to get divorced. And years later, after observing them as a couple, they're in a much better place now than they were at the time. They both have changed significantly for the better. In that case, we were able to work through it. Not everybody can do that. You know what I'm saying? That's not the answer for everybody. And if it's not the answer for you and you've made your decision, it's perfectly okay to do what you need to do for, big picture, good things in the future.
And I think not everybody wants to move on from that. Like, it does take two people who are really committed to move through infidelity.
Right. It's very hard to trust. The critical factor is communication and trust. If you don't trust the person, it's a problem.
Now, your chapter 6 of your book mentions, like, difficult individuals and, some major signs. Like, what for our listeners are some major signs that your spouse might be cheating? Oh, they figured it out.
Yeah. I mean, I think that maybe, I need a little clarification. In terms of actual cheating, regularly when people don't come home, they don't come home till midnight. I mean, and mind you, every couple is unique and they have to do what's comfortable for them. We're very together all the time. And other people really do go on vacations with their friends or separately and things like that. So you kind of have to know, you need to know the pattern of the person, I think, and your life is together. And then if you're getting something different, I think that's one of the major factors. If the people just aren't connected and they're like living a parallel life, you may not even know until you find out. But I would say a lot of the times I hear people say, the person's been out numerous times during the week. They don't come home. That's a sure sign, that something's wrong and going on. It may not be exactly that, but that's a sign that something's.
Now let's talk about, I'd love for our listeners to hear from you the impact of infidelity typically, during the divorce process, because I know we've both heard, well, I can't wait till the judge hears that and they cheated, and how it really plays out in court. I'd love for you to, based on your experience, for our listeners.
Okay, well, one of my qualities, good, bad, and different, is that I'm blunt. So I'm sorry. In New Jersey, they don't care much at all. Okay, period, the end. It's almost never a factor of consideration. And the only time it becomes a factor of consideration is when it actually has a financial impact.
Right.
Meaning, right. If somebody goes and buys a condo for their girlfriend, or they're, spending tens of thousands of dollars on prostitutes or something like that, then we have a financial dissipation, removing money from the estate of the marriage for the sake of another person. And then it's a factor in the case, because the courts really try and we are a no-fault state. All the states have no-fault divorce. And so the court really tries to bring it down to, what are the incomes of the parties? What's the money of the people? Where are the kids going? And unfortunately, people have to sort of swallow, to a certain extent, that reality.
Mm-hmm.
And also during the course of many divorces or whatever, somebody has somebody else. And even if the courts are very sensitive and say, oh, you're not going to do anything with that person in front of the children during the divorce process. Okay, so however many months or whatever that is, the millisecond people are divorced, that person's likely going to be in their life.
Right.
So kids are going to be there. So does it make sense to fight that whole thing endlessly, or you got to kind of accept it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a process. Certainly not something you accept straight away, but that's our system.
Yeah, and I think we would both agree the evolution to no-fault divorce is better for individuals, right? And that's kind of where you didn't have to prove the affair or anything like that. But it's interesting, in Florida, a couple years ago, we had a lot of changes in the law. So the alimony statute, and in the consideration of alimony, it could be considered by the court if there was an extramarital relationship. Brand new. And so in awarding alimony, now it's too new, hasn't really been tested yet in appeals. And, for our listeners, that's just, we get a lot of the interpretation of the law after cases have been appealed. But we believe potentially that we could argue maybe for more alimony or longer if the husband's infidelity really created the break and maybe the woman isn't as financially secure. Because we've been talking about, how would we use it in a way within that statute? And then I think men want to use it to say, she cheated on me, I shouldn't have to pay alimony.
It's a very interesting legal conversation. There was a request for commentary on the law called the covenant marriage. I don't know if you've looked at this yet.
No.
So there is this thing in 3 states, as I understand it. It's in Arizona, Arkansas, and Louisiana. And it's called covenant marriage, where they have a statute. And I think part of it is brilliance. And part of it is just like what just changed in your law. It's probably politically related to a certain extent, where the covenant marriage requires 5 hours of premarital counseling before marriage. And you also have an obligation during the course of your marriage, if you do have issues, to continue counseling. That's part of your covenant in your marriage. However, the statute also eliminates no-fault divorce and goes back to all the old-fashioned that we all had in the past. Yeah, based on infidelity, based on abandonment, based on drunkenness, and things like that. My opinion of that is, I think the premarital counseling is phenomenal. I think that is a magical idea. And I think, people should do it anyways, with or without the law. I think during the marriage, people should do the same thing. If you have a problem, be proactive to resolve it. I think, again, I don't know what's going on in Florida. Our courts are so bogged down here in New Jersey in terms of cases, motions, trials, to then go put the burden of evaluating the cause of action on the judges, in addition to the normal financial and custody issues, I think may be unreasonable in our society. I'm not, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if it's really going to help people or it's just going to clog up the courts more. There's certainly a rational basis to say, look, if there's infidelity, I get it, the sensitivity, but again, I don't know if practically it's going to help the process or hurt the process.
And I think time will tell, but it is interesting, changing, evolving in your state, which does affect, obviously, your divorce. So you want, obviously, to talk about that with your attorney, but let's talk about technology. Sure. Because I think that's really changed the landscape of family law and divorce cases over the years we've been practicing, and would love to talk to you a little bit about, what you've seen, some caution for our listeners on using certain technology.
Yeah, I actually submit. I'm very interested now that you said they changed the law in Florida. I hear what goes on, but yeah, I mean that makes people feel better, certainly. But in terms of the technology, I actually give out with my initial papers when people retain us to be, in bold letters. Think before you send, because people don't realize that any text message, any email they send, any Facebook junk they put up can be used as evidence in a court of law, usually against them. Okay, so I caution my clients straight up to be very, and certainly during the course of a divorce or during this process, people are angry and emotional, and people say things that they probably shouldn't say. So, it's a good idea to, if you're going to send a note, step away, let yourself calm down, and then go back. But texting angry, emailing angry, almost always bites you in the butt.
Let's talk about wiretapping. Now, have you had much experience with that or seen a lot with that?
Not a lot. I mean, wiretap, first of all, somebody has to go figure out the technology to go, and you got to go to the spy store and go get the devices to do that. Somebody has to be motivated enough to go get that. I have had cases with tracking devices, both on the phone device, the GPS systems, and I am not technologically savvy, so I learn my way through these things as we're dealing with them. The AirTag. I've had people put the AirTag into people's cars. So then I had a case where we had to go and have Mercedes go find the AirTag, pull it out of the car, and use it as evidence. So these kind of techniques, first of all, are illegal. Yeah, wiretapping is illegal. In New Jersey, we are a one-person consent state, meaning if one person consents to a conversation between two people, the one person, even if the other person doesn't know, the individual can record that conversation here in New Jersey. That one cannot record two other people. So if you're going to use a device to record your wife and her boyfriend, can't do that. But you can have a conversation with your wife or vice versa. The device, in terms of the tracker, totally illegal. We have domestic violence laws. I'm sure you have domestic violence laws. Those actions can be deemed stalking as well. So to engage in that becomes very difficult, and one could have actually a restraining order, which is quasi-criminal, and a record as a result of those actions. That's not so good. And then even if you are wiretapping, let's say you get some juicy material and you bring it to your lawyer, because it is criminal in nature, any intelligent lawyer is going to say we're not using that because you're just going to be harmed as an individual for having done that criminal act. So those are some of the nuances to it.
Which is very important. And I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think our clients, are in an emotional state, generally going through divorce. You watch enough TV. There's a lot of TV on there, and there are spy stores. I've never been in one, but I've certainly had clients who are, and I think there's two ways to go about it, or two ways to look at it. And because a lot of households have a lot of devices, like the Ring camera, right? That just exists, but some people can use it in a different way, maybe if they're no longer in the house, to be spying, I guess. I think it's important to recognize, is that on my house? She's moved out. Do I feel like maybe there's something weird about it? I think a lot of families voluntarily are using Life 360 or sharing their location, and then they kind of forget or don't really think about removing that when they're in these proceedings. Emotions can get high, and someone may decide, well, I do want to know where they are and what they're doing. That can lead you down a dangerous path, I think, for sure.
Yeah, and it's like a double-edged sword. We as lawyers, it all comes down to the expectation of privacy. And that's the technical lingo that they use. Would a person reasonably be able to assert their expectation of privacy relative to what is being done? Because we do have so many devices. And obviously, as lawyers, you can argue if it's like your title, your car that's in your name, and then somebody else is driving the car, but you're putting the device on your car. Mm-hmm. We could, that's our job, is to defend our clients and their actions. But there's some that are pretty straightforward, not a great idea. One judge might be perfectly fine with it, or say, pursuant to the letter of the law, this is this person's car, and therefore they have the right to do this. And you can go to the next courtroom, and the judge is like, no, that's wacky. Yeah. I'm not buying into that. That's stalking. Yeah. Clearly, that person always used that car. There's no reason to follow them. So the clients, and I'm sure yours do as well, need to understand.
Exactly. And the judge is right. If it doesn't sound like it's the right thing to do, a lot of times they will not appreciate it. Now, let's talk about reasonable expectation of privacy and emails. It's shocking how they're like, oh, I found all these particular emails that you're not on. But I think it'd be great for our clients to hear that. And it's also good to keep in mind, if you guys all use the same computer, you need to be careful about your stuff too. But realistically, using the emails, have you had cases where that's come up and how that's looked upon?
Yeah, I mean, as much as we want to support our clients and help them through this difficult time, and, right. And it may be an absolute fact. Somebody's cheating, no question. But if there's no way that person got that email other than by interfering with somebody else's email or, doing something deceptive, there's a problem. And listen, every lawyer's different. Everybody can use their own discretion. Me personally, if I see something that really isn't kosher, we'll call it, really doesn't pass the smell test, I don't think it's necessary. And again, let's go to the end game. Let's go to the big picture. Okay. So he's having an affair with his secretary, or she's with the boss or whatever. So all that concludes is, if you feel that's the basis to end your marriage, go forward with the divorce. And you can certainly get the data to see if money is being spent on that person. And that has substance in the case. If you see a bunch of expenses for somebody and then it goes back, that will be your proofs. And they can be obtained legally, properly, and may be able to do something for you actually at the end of the case.
Right. And I think that's so helpful to explain, because that it's the financial aspect of the potential relationship that will probably be relevant. And then the question becomes, how much money do we spend to prove it? Really, at the end of the day, does that get you where you want to go in this divorce? Is that a successful divorce for you? Or was it just us going down a rabbit hole, spending more money, but yet it's not going to change the final result significantly, if at all. And that's the hard thing for our listeners or clients to hear, but it's the truth that is that hard news we have to deliver sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, the only time, look, if one's considering what will happen in a court of law exclusively, you can't have high hopes that the judge is going to be excited over it. The judge sees 1,000 of these. They don't know one. Sometimes, just in negotiation, if you know somebody's cheating and you have the data and it's not a big financial thing, sometimes it's a helpful tool in persuasion to resolve a case just because the other person doesn't want the embarrassment factor. So it's just sort of like it. Sometimes this practice, I'm sure you have a work of art behind you. Sometimes it's art, and it depends on the individual. Are you going to really get a lot of juice out of it? Probably not. But, it's a factor to be considered. And it's a factor also, let's just say, for custody. Okay, so if you're having, it's not the affair, it's the individual that, and is that going to affect custody at the end in terms of being with your children or child?
Mm-hmm.
That's a side thing.
It's important, I think, at the end of the day, if that's your issue for our listeners, tell your lawyer, but don't go off on your own investigations and creating a lot of stuff without talking to your lawyer. Really understand the goals, the issues, and if that's worth your time and energy, because it might just be an energy sucker that doesn't help you as an individual move forward with your life after this divorce.
Correct.
Now, speaking of that, because that's, what we would envision as successful, I'd love to know what inspired you to write your book. It's a great title.
Thanks. It's a controversial title. I didn't realize it afterwards. It's pretty funny. Like if I give it to anybody, like I have, people that I do business with and back and forth accountants and financial people and all kinds of stuff. And then they take it home and all their spouses are like, what does this book mean? And it's like, no, it's just somebody to help somebody else. Genuinely, I'm in this practice to help people. That's my job. Mm-hmm. And I can't save the world. I can, we do one case at a time, do our best. And I think people, I'm sure you find the same thing. So many people come into the office with so many misconceptions about everything, even the cheating thing. Yeah. Like they're going to get some giant sum of money as a result of this bad act by their spouse. So we
have to see how they're going to apply it, right? Time will tell. But
I'm very I look at things, cost analyses, even though obviously you want to support and help a person through this. And I just tried to write something that wasn't too heavy, that's just, basically informational, and to give people some clear direction. I think that's why I have had my practice so long, is I'm very straight, and honest, sensitive, but I try and keep people balanced and sort of in the bumpers, and that's it. And I think that's what this book is, to try and give people some truth.
And I do think that's helpful because there's not agreed. It's good for our clients and all listeners to have a resource other than TV, movies, and what happened in your best friend's divorce, because that's going to set you up for probably unrealistic expectations and not really success, that we and certainly you as a great attorney who cares about their clients, we want you to have a successful divorce. We want you to understand the process because it's complicated. It's so different than regular life, right? I think many of our clients, I just want to go tell the judge these things. And it's like, no, it just doesn't work like that. And it's not going to sway them one side or the other. It's a hard truth for them.
Yeah. I think it's important to understand the lack of, and I don't even want to say the lack of sensitivity, just the very business-like nature of the court system. And,
business-like nature.
Where people just, they expect that this stuff really impacts others, and it in real, like, for your friends, your family, it does, but you're just a number in court. and to kind of take your ego and check it at the door and deal with whoever. And people, of all walks of life go through, and I'm sure you do too. You see, I mean, I handle very, very large cases and regular people. And to be truthful, it's kind of the same. We're all people and we sort of all go through the same stuff. It's just different zeros, and, I think everybody should be cared about, but everybody also should be treated, and be able to understand the playing field is leveled in the system.
Absolutely. Let's talk. I want to just touch on postnuptial agreements because we've talked a lot about infidelity and, whether or not that you stay together or not. And I don't think there's a lot out there on postnuptials. We've done them certainly before and talk about them. It's like how that can be a tool to rebuild trust and, provide you some protection.
Well, it's sort of a double-edged sword here in New Jersey. I don't know what the law is in Florida. Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting subject. Believe it or not, if you just jump the river and go to New York City, really not even an hour from here, they do them all the time. Here in New Jersey, we have prenups, which are prior to the marriage, and that follows the Uniform Prenuptial Agreement Act, where it's very, very focused on disclosure. Mm-hmm. It's as long as there was full disclosure and knowledge about what's going on, don't even need a lawyer anymore, and everybody's on the same page. People can contract and do their prenup. Okay, so that's the standard for that. Mid-marriage agreements or postnuptial agreements, the standard is completely different. And the courts in our state are much more sensitive to people being in the middle of a marriage and analyzing it as to whether or not the person was under duress, the person was, whether they had full knowledge, because they look at the end, like in that time, right? If somebody's cheated and they want to keep their marriage together, did somebody sign something financially that is to their detriment, just wanted to keep their marriage together? Emotionally, I have a hard time telling the difference between the two, like a prenup and a postnup emotionally, you know what I'm saying? But the standard is what the standard is under the law. But here, while the marriage is in distress, the courts are very careful about the different standard, and they will analyze to determine whether or not there was this duress or undue influence at the time of the agreement, and that versus when the parties do get a divorce, because that's it. The only time it's used is if
there's a divorce.
Then you then you take the agreement, you bring it in front of the divorce court, and does it really make sense based on what happened financially in the marriage? That's how they do. So it's more sensitive, but I have worked on them, and I include in it the higher standard. I will only do it if the other person has a lawyer, and I make sure again that there's full financial disclosure, because to me, any marriage is based on honesty, vulnerability, transparency. So, I don't think it's I'm not afraid to do them, but I want to do them very carefully and to make sure everybody's on the same playing field and not under duress. Because there's certain circumstances, people inherit a lot of money and they want it.
Yeah, and I love that. And that's great to understand the evaluation, because again, for our listeners, it depends where you are. You need to talk to a lawyer if it's something, but it is a tool that can be used, certainly. Now, Tanya, before we go, our time has gone so quickly that I can't believe it, but can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience?
Women, we all play many different roles in life. I mean, I was divorced. I'm divorced as well. I've been a single mom. I was married for a really long time as well. Yeah, we can do a lot of stuff. And I never like to put men down. I love men as well, but we can multitask the way men are not usually able to multitask. They have their own greatness. They're more directed. We run around. And many of the women that I've represented have learned from the process. I'm proud to say that I have helped them, and what they tell me, what I do impart on them is courage and empowerment. And I have many, stay-at-home moms that learn to manage money and get jobs and still take care of their kids and still provide a wonderful, loving home for their children and move on to great success and a happier life. So I think that speaks to your question.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Now, lastly, Tanya, where can our listeners find out more about you for information and resources?
Well, I'm at this lovely law firm, Skank, Price, Smith & King, here in Florham Park, New Jersey. You could Google me. I'm online, TanyaHelfand, and our number and contact is online if anybody needs a consultation. The book is out there as well on Amazon, and we're just here. I have a wonderful team here to help people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today. We have reached the end of our show, and we really appreciating having Tanya Helfand on our show today to talk about when cheating is a reason for divorce and how it impacts the legal process, the legal risks of tracking, wiretapping, and gathering digital evidence on a spouse, and of course, key insights from 20 great tips for a successful divorce. Again, thank you so much, and all of her links and resources will be listed in the show notes. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Thank you so much.
Listeners, if you or someone you know in the Northeast Florida area is going through or even thinking about divorce, you're not alone. Taking that first step can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Our newsletter is filled with actionable advice tailored to guide you through this process. By signing up, you'll gain the tools to face the unknown with courage and see if we're the right fit to support you during this life-changing time. Don't wait. Click the link in the show notes, fill out the form, and take the first step toward building a brighter future today.